Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a short story because it is Short Story Tuesday, and this short story is all about the Around the Weird, as I have found one from India. And it's a short story about prejudice and friendship and lost friendship. I am referring to Kabuliwala by Rabindranath Tagore, which was published around 1892. For those who don't know, Rabindranath Tagore was a Bengali writer from India who was known as something of a multi-talent, as he not only wrote, but he was also a social commentator, a political activist, and a painter, among many other things. In addition to writing novels, books, and short stories, and plays as well. He also spoke out about British imperialism as he lived between the late 1800s and the early 1900s. So British colonialism in India was still very much a thing for him. And he frequently spoke out about that, and he denounced his own knighthood because he was made a knight by the British, but he was like, yeah, no thanks. I'd rather you guys just leave or something like that. And he also frequently said that it'd probably be better, rather than outright revolution, for the Indian people to become educated and more knowledgeable about the state of the world, which upset a lot of people because they wanted the British out right away, and he kind of spoke out against victimhood or victimology or stuff like that. So it seems like he was just more of a fan of education than outright revolution, which resulted in some people targeting him for assassination. I don't think they were ever successful. But that's something that was out there for him. And so in a lot of his works, you see that focus on the state of the world and education and getting knowledge, and maybe not being so focused on the nationalism or anything like that, although he was a nationalist. So it's a bit unclear what exactly he was advocating for, and I think I'd have to read more of his philosophical work in order to get a better understanding of that. So a pretty interesting author who I'm glad that I found in my various short story searches. So without further ado, let's talk about Kabuliwala, or the trader, or the man, or the vendor from Kabul. I'm finding a bunch of different explanations for what that title specifically means, and as well as that, the various stories that I found have all translated his story a bit differently. So possibly, and even in the story, it's there are multiple ways to say the same thing. So something interesting to consider there. So without further ado, I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we'll move on from there. So Kabuliwala focuses on an unnamed narrator who is a writer, and right there you see a writer giving a character in his story the job of a writer, which isn't very creative, but is always fun to point out. And he lives in India with a bit of a chatty daughter along with his wife. His daughter asks a lot of questions, like, what is your relationship to mother? And talking about how there must be some sort of elephant in the sky that is shooting rain on people with its trunk, just spewing nonsense as well as asking questions. And he finds it's hard to, keep up with his daughter, and also hard to keep up with his work. But things change when a Kabuliwala, a vendor from Kabul, shows up one day. His daughter sees the man and hides, and the narrator presumes it's because she's heard stories about men like him. There's a bit of a prejudice towards men like him, and she thinks that there might be, this man might have a bag which is full of goods. It might carry around children, and they might kidnap her. But over time, the daughter Minnie and the trader become friends. It turns out that he's given her like a coin, or any money that the father gives to him, he gives back to the daughter. So he's kind of bribing her into some friendship, but they also talk about life, and he's willing to answer her questions. And in addition to that, they have a little running joke where Minnie says, he says, "Are you going to your father-in-law's house?" Because it's believed that this girl will be in an arranged marriage at some point in the future, although her parents haven't told her. So she just believes that he's saying, "Are you going to jail?" Because funnily enough, father-in-law is also slang for jail, which is a little bit of social commentary there. And Minnie, who thinks it's jail, says, "I don't know. Are you going to father-in-law's house? Are you going to jail?" And they have a little bit of a laugh about that. However, it's also indicated that the mother is still scared about the Kabuliwala because she believes that he might try to kidnap her and take her back to Afghanistan, and there's just a whole bunch of prejudice associated with that. And I don't think she completely comes around on that idea. A short while later, the Kabuliwala indicates that he's going to go home. And before he does, he has to go around to each house collecting from his debtors based on what he sold them. Unfortunately, the narrator hears a ruckus a short while later and sees the Kabuliwala covered in blood. And he presumes that the Kabuliwala tried to collect some money from someone who bought something from him, but they refused. And so he attacked them in some way. And the police say that he has to go off to jail, unfortunately. And from that point, years pass, and the narrator notes that Minnie, his daughter, has forgotten about the Kabuliwala, as most people have, although the narrator seems to possess some memory of this person. Eventually, they reach a point where the daughter is now having a wedding, and everything is busy at the house at that moment. The Kabuliwala returns, and the narrator doesn't recall who they are at first, but then does remember and tells them, "Oh, could you come back another day? We're kind of busy right now." And the Kabuliwala says, I'll be sure to do that, but before I go, can you give your daughter this gift? I don't want any of your money for it. I just want your daughter to have it. And the man is so taken from that, he is touched by that moment and realizes that the Kabuliwala was not only away from his daughter Minnie this whole time, but also his own daughter. That the reason he kind of hung around Minnie so much is because he's from Afghanistan, quite a distance away from home, and so this was his way to connect with someone who was maybe like his own daughter. And so finally he decides he's going to go get Minnie and brings her to the Kabuliwala. Unfortunately, when he tries to get her to recall anything like their connection from the past, she unfortunately doesn't remember him, which is a little bit sad. And Minnie goes back to deal with her wedding. And as the story ends, the narrator gives a little bit of coins to the Kabuliwala and tells him to return home, in the hopes that he might be able to connect with his own daughter. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, this is a fairly sad story of people hoping that, friendship, you can rekindle friendship, but Tagore seems to indicate that maybe you can't really rekindle some friendships because of the passage of time. And indeed, one of the themes that Tagore is working with here is friendship. Minnie and the trader quickly becomes friends in this story. They hang around each other, and Minnie likes the trader because he's willing to listen to her with the many, many, many questions that she all has. We all know children who ask tons of questions, and that's really Minnie in this story. The trader, who probably is dealing with a lot of discrimination in India because of his status as an outsider, is just happy to have anyone who's willing to listen to him. And this entire friendship seems to be born out of misunderstanding, with many kind of afraid that the Kabuliwala might try to kidnap her because maybe she's heard similar stories about that. But as she hangs around him more and more, she sees that he's an okay guy, and they're willing to chat and have that little bit of friendship, that they become kind of inseparable, even if Minnie's mother is afraid of this man because of her own prejudice that she feels towards him. There's a lot of inside jokes with this friendship, as you would see in any friendship, including the idea of like, are you going to father-in-law's house, which seems to be jail for either of them. And I like how the Kabuliwala replies like, oh yeah, I'm going to give father-in-law a good thrashing. And when he gets arrested, he says the same thing, but he's handcuffed. So he's like, unfortunately, I can't give father-in-law jail a good thrashing because I'm in jail, which is funny, but also a bit sad because he's being taken away at that point. And like most friendships, like sometimes they fade away. And indeed, this friendship kind of fades away over the years, which is, you typically see in stories like friendships lasting. But Tagore is, I guess he's being honest here, and he's saying, sometimes friendships go away. We don't remember those people who had such an impact early on in our lives, or even at various stages in our life. And you see that sad ending here where Tagore points out like that Minnie no longer remembers the Kabuliwala, even though he brings up the same joke that he usually told, because she's at a different stage in her life. It just doesn't ring the same anymore. She doesn't recall him, and so ultimately, their friendship isn't allowed to thrive because of that, of how time has just displaced their friendship. And what's really interesting is how, for the Kabuliwala, like this friendship, it allows him to have something else as well. Like he gets something else out of this friendship. Minnie gets the companionship that she needs to just ask a billion questions, but the Kabuliwala gets an opportunity to connect with someone who is like his daughter, because he is a trader and has to leave the country so often to make money for his family back home in Afghanistan. He's not able to hang out with his family, especially his own daughter. And so for Minnie, what she represents is a stand-in for his daughter, someone who's like his daughter, who he can connect with, who he can, be a part of their life and help see them grow and maybe stand up for them whenever necessary. And you would think like, oh, well, maybe since Minnie doesn't remember him, he can go home. And even though he's been away from home and in jail for such a long time, like maybe his daughter might still remember him. But the sad thing is, like, if Minnie doesn't remember him, maybe his own daughter might not really recognize him anymore. So the story kind of has a really downer ending in that regard. And Tagore is kind of having a negative sort of like perspective on friendship. But the really good thing is like that the narrator is still willing to engage in some friendship. Like he sees the man from Kabul and allows to, or has a conversation with him, whereas before he was probably willing to push him to the side. So there is some hope here. And then another interesting element of the story is that of prejudice. You see in the story a rich Indian family, because the narrator is presumed to be wealthy. He's a rich Indian family, or like this rich Indian family has stereotypes about this mysterious foreign Afghani vendor. Right at the beginning of the story, you see the father, the daughter says something about the vendor, and the father's like, oh no, now I have to talk to this person. They probably didn't want to talk with them. They probably had stereotypes, and they just didn't have a high opinion of the vendor. There might have been some social prejudice going on at the time. I'm not really knowledgeable about that, but I do know that India has some troubled relationships with countries that are around it, and especially at the time, it would have shared a border with India with Afghanistan, because Pakistan was part of India at the time. So whereas now that separates India from Afghanistan, before it would not have done so. But I like how the family slowly overcomes this prejudice, especially with Minnie and the father, who seems to be more okay with the vendor over time. But the fears still remain. Like the mother in particular is worried that the vendor might steal away the child, kidnap her to Afghanistan when given the chance, and that there's something insidious about the man from Kabul. And I don't think anything's really going to change that for her, especially because there might have been some like just social aspects of this that it might have been reinforced by society. And so even though knowledge is helpful, there still might be some prejudice because it's taught by the environment more so than anything else. And what's interesting, though, is that for the narrator, things become more positive, that change is possible, that you can eliminate prejudice by seeing people as people rather than just mysterious foreigners. At the end of the story, when the narrator hears about the man from Kabul and sees him come back and realizes that his daughter was really a stand-in for the man from Kabul's daughter the whole time, he sees him as a father more so than anything else. Like he sees him as an actual person. And so it is possible, once you learn about a person, once you bring them closer to you, once you remove these barriers of like not really understanding another person, like you can see them as a human being, and they become less of racism or prejudice becomes less of a possibility. Which is a very positive message to have. I did like it, and it was very touching to see the narrator kind of change their opinion and their perspective of the man from Kabul. And then just another thing worth mentioning is there does seem to be a commentary on girlhood versus womanhood in this story, whereas like at the beginning of the story, the man from Kabul says, "Are you going to father-in-law's house?" Which the narrator notes like he hasn't told his daughter about the birds and the bees or the fact that she's probably in an arranged marriage or that she might have to go to her father-in-law's place in the future. She's kind of an innocent at this point, immature at this point. Whereas later in the story, like the Kabuliwala asks the same question, and she's kind of embarrassed because now she knows what father-in-law's house means. It means sex, it means marriage, it means having to grow up and move to the next stage of your life. And it seems kind of like an inappropriate question to ask. And Minnie goes someplace else at that point. And so you see Tagore kind of making a commentary about girlhood versus womanhood by noting how like at different stages of your life, the same question can produce different kinds of reactions. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Kabuliwala by Rabindranath Tagore, a pretty solid short story. I do think it's very, very interesting, but the message is a little bit undermined by the fact that despite the fact that he wants to convince us that the Kabuliwala is harmless, ultimately he does do violence in the community by attacking one of his debtors. Although he was cheated out of it, so it's kind of a wash there, but still, I do feel like Tagore's message is a little bit killed or a little contradicted by the story that he actually does tell. But it's still worth pursuing, still worth checking out. I usually have that experience with Indian short stories such as The Lottery and the Lihaf or The Quilt, pretty solid Indian short stories, and I recommend that you check this one out, so I'm going to put a link to it in the description. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this story or this author if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Kabulian travels. Farewell.